And now, a KCTS 9 Digital Studios original, made possible with your support. Thank you. Race, Justice, and Democracy is presented in partnership with Heritage University and Humanities Washington.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
It's time for us to come together and talk.
Sometimes you have to push people to have uncomfortable conversations.
About Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida. Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Antonio Zambrano Montes in Pasco, Washington.
Visit your favorite America branch or go online.
Sandra Bland in Waller County, Texas.
Step out or I will remove you. I'm giving you a lawful order.
And 9 deaths in a Charleston, South Carolina church.
I've had to make statements like this too many times.
These and other high-profile incidents in Baltimore, New York, and Ohio have left us wondering about race relations in America and here in Washington State, as well as police responsibility and accountability.
The community wants to be protected by us. They don't want to be conquered by us.
And wondering about our justice system and equality in our democracy.
Okay, now what? Where do we go from here?
There are no quick fixes. This is not something that's going to happen in overnight, a month, a year. This is going to take years. But what we need the first steps.
I'm Enrique Cerna, and welcome to the Yakima Valley Museum in Yakima, Washington. The museum brings to life the unique history and diverse cultural heritage of the Yakima Valley, and it's a fitting location for us to have one of the most important yet challenging conversations in our country today. A conversation about race, about justice, and about the impact on our democracy. These are not easy issues to discuss, but if we want to make some common ground, find some common ground, we need to talk. We want to get this much needed conversation started, not just here in Yakima, but throughout the state of Washington. And we hope our discussion tonight will help to do just that. Now, joining us are 4 people who are deeply involved in the issues of race, justice, and democracy. Mark O'Mara is a CNN legal analyst and a criminal defense attorney who successfully defended George Zimmerman in the controversial shooting death of Trayvon Martin in what was called the Stand Your Ground defense. Laura Contreras is the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project directing attorney for Eastern Washington. She's based in the nearby town of Granger. And Christopher Parker is an associate professor of political science at the University of Washington. He lectures and he writes extensively on civil rights and racial politics. And Sue Rahr is the former King County Sheriff. She's currently the executive director of the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, and she's also a member of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. And please welcome our panelists tonight. Let's start with this. Are we afraid to talk about race, Mark O'Mara?
Absolutely. Well, let me say it this way, and we talked about this before. Whites are particularly afraid to talk about race for a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't need to, among other whites, because it doesn't really affect us. And we're also very afraid to talk about it openly because one slip, one misword, or one insensitivity to the situation that particularly the black community deals with on a daily basis, and you can get labeled. You can get ignored, labeled, because of that insensitivity. So yes, I think, though we may not fully admit to it, that particularly whites are very worried about having a conversation about race for fail of screwing it up.
Laura?
I think we are afraid to talk about it. One of the most important things you need to do when you do start talking about it is to have a safe space, a safe place where you're able to have that conversation and not be judged and criticized about your experiences and your ideas. So long as you have that safe space, you can have those conversations.
Chris Parker?
I think that, first of all, Black Lives Matter. So I think everyone's afraid of talking about race. I think when we're in our own respective spaces with our own people like us, it's very, very easy. But if one is a person of color, and one is in a corporate boardroom, one is in a faculty meeting, one is in any other place in which there aren't other people of color, especially black people, such as myself, then it's a very, very strained and difficult topic to discuss. Because then everyone wants to say, or if they're not saying it explicitly, they're suggesting or they're thinking that you're playing a race card, right? Even if you're talking around it. So this is a very, very difficult subject to address right now, especially here and now, because the nation is in such upheaval, perhaps not seen since the 1960s. So I'll just throw that one out there as food for thought.
Surara.
I think it's difficult for the reasons that have been raised, but I think it's also difficult because we all understand it differently. And all of our experiences are so different. It's very difficult to appreciate how the other person is feeling. You haven't grown up in the same circumstances. So I think the combination of fear and then the lack of knowledge, I think, creates fear because you just don't understand. I had a conversation with Brian Stevenson, who's just a fine man. He's a civil rights attorney in Alabama. And we had many conversations during the President's Task Force. And I was kind of kidding around with him because he's spearheading a project trying to get National Historic Site designation for lynching sites. And I said, Brian, why are you doing that? You know, why are you inflaming this? And he looked at me, and he was very kind. He's a great role model for having conversations about race because he's kind about it and he didn't get angry. But he said, Sue, would you tell a Jew that we don't need a Holocaust museum? And I just thought, I felt about this tall, but it was such a mind-opening experience for me because I think of myself as being pretty open-minded. And that started many more conversations with him. But I just think we fundamentally don't understand the perspective of other people because of our experiences are so different.
So how do we understand? How do we make it safe? Hopefully this is going to be a place where it can be fairly safe.
Well, one suggestion I have, watch a movie, read an article, and then sit down and talk about it afterwards. It doesn't have to be everybody spilling their guts and telling their story, but it could be based on something else, a movie.
Mark?
I think that you just have to dive in. I don't know how else to do it, because since Zimmerman and sort of the opportunity I've had, good and bad across the spectrum, to talk about this, I sort of realized that you can talk about talking, and that's great. We can talk about talking about having a conversation about race, and that's all wonderful. And everyone raise their hand and say, yes, I definitely want to talk about talking about race and the problems we have in the criminal justice system. It doesn't really get us anywhere. People ask me questions about how could I represent him, and I say, look at my pedigree. For 30 years, I have handled a disproportionate share of young black males in the criminal justice system because they're in it. And as long as we stay almost politically correct and also partly afraid to talk about it, we're not going to get anywhere. There's no question that we have to look and see how is this happening. And there are people who are going to blame the young black males, people who are going to blame the cops, and somewhere in between. But we got to get going. We got to actually sit back and figure it out. And the other thing about it is talking is not quite as good as figuring out how we're going to start to fix it. And one way that I said, and we talked about this to a couple of the police officers here, one very easy way to address this, I think, is a body camera for all cops. It works. And I know there are problems, particularly in Washington, with the public records request and the demand on cops. But if we do it in a way that actually has a reason that we can look and say, this is being identified and here's a solution, it's a lot better than these principled, great conversations that we're going to talk about talking.
And we'll get to that in some of our poll results. We conducted a poll, and want to mention this now. As part of our conversation tonight, we're going to share results from an exclusive KCTS 9 Elway poll that we conducted last week. We surveyed 400 Washington adults that were registered voter households to get their insights on racial attitudes, police relations, and our justice system, and voting rights. And let me go to actually that very first poll result. When we asked, are race relations in the U.S. generally good or generally bad? And 43% said good, 47% viewed our race relations as bad, In fact, in our state, we're slightly more negative about race relations than national results from a CBS poll that was conducted last November. And let me move on to the second poll result that we had. Do you think race relations in your community are generally good or generally bad? 86% said good, while 10% said bad. Now, that's much more positive than the national results, but it's interesting because I think maybe it tells us about what we see nationally in many of the incidents and how people maybe don't see that so much in their hometown. Chris Parker?
Yeah, let me pull this apart here. So I see your polls here. I happen to do polling myself, and I would like to see this disaggregated by race. Because, you know, if we're talking about any sort of representative poll, you're going to have more, let's be frank about this, more white people in these polls. So therefore, it's going to skew generally in a more positive direction. But if you disaggregated these numbers by race, you know, I dare say the results will look a lot different. I would say among people of color, there would be a lot more people of color that would say race relations are bad and continuing to get worse, right? And this is not something that's new. There's been this sort of gap in perceptions of race relations between whites and everybody else for a very long time. So I just kind of want to throw that one out there. I think it's really important to break this apart, to disaggregate this by race, because I think those results are misleading if we're talking about trying to solve this problem.
Suraj.
And I would add to that, I would disaggregate it by age too. And one of my frustrations early on when I started at the Academy, I was trying to get good information from the community. And a lot of polling is done by calling people on their landline phones. And just saying. So my guess is you're going to have a lot of folks over 50 that can't give up their landlines. But their experience in the community is different as well. And one of the things that I struggled with, and we haven't overcome that yet, is to figure out a way to do accurate polling through social media, through mobile devices, because we miss huge portions of the population. Now, why it's a problem for me is when I'm teaching recruits, when I'm teaching leadership classes to police leaders, they go to these polls and say, look, there's no problem here. You know, 85% or 83% of the people don't think there's a problem. It's the media. The media is evil. And so I would encourage the media.
Gee, thanks. Here we go. Yeah.
I would encourage the media to work together with these polling companies and figure out a way to get better data, because I don't think, my own experience tells me that that data isn't very strong.
Let me also mention here that if you want to see these poll results, you can go to kcts9.org, which they're broken down, and you can see for yourself, you know, the gender, the areas, the cell phone or landline, all of that. So if we folks want to do that, go to kcts9.org. Chris, you go to
just
KCTS9.
real quick, I just want to say more polling we are now incorporating a lot more cell phones. So that's one thing. And another thing I want to point out is polls of registered voters tend to be biased as well, because you have registered voters look somewhat different from people who are not voting. People who are not voting tend to be more progressive, more in favor of redistributive stuff. I mean, they tend to be poor, you know, people of color. That's who they tend to be. And so we have to take that into consideration too. So whenever I do my polls, I include everybody, not just registered voters.
There is an interesting element in that, a lesson, and that is that 83 to 84% of the people that were polled believe it's not their problem, right? Oh, our community is fine. 50% of the people think that there's a problem out there, but in our community it's not. And the problem with that is that if people don't take it on as their problem, 85% of people say it's somebody else's backyard, then there's no buy-in to a solution. So I think when I look at that poll and I go, yeah, 85% of the people are somewhat ignorant, because none of us who do any of this work could suggest that there is not a racial concern. Maybe in the criminal justice system, certainly, and therefore in the socioeconomic concerns and whatnot. But if you actually think that it's not your problem because it's not in your backyard, you're never going to look for a solution.
Well, I want to go back to, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Some of us just don't want to look at it.
Right.
It's in our backyard. We had it in Yakima just last year. So it's in our backyard.
Explain.
There were several instances of individuals that were shot by officers. I know that charges weren't brought, but they happened. So there has been, fatal encounters between law enforcement and unarmed individuals of color in Yakima. So we've seen it here.
And as we speak, we have just had a decision by the Franklin County prosecutor to not charge the officers that were involved in the shooting of Antonio Zambrano Montes in Pasco, which has obviously raised a lot of concerns. The governor is weighing in. He wants another investigation. So that adds, I would take it, to that feeling of that our race relations, our relations with police and trust are not good.
I have to jump in here a little bit, because one of the reasons I wanted to come on tonight is I want to be the voice of law enforcement, because I think there's a tendency for law enforcement to all be painted with the same brush. And we are all individuals. We belong to the same profession. And I would just ask people to consider what you read in the newspaper. You read, the police shot an unarmed person. What does that mean? When they say unarmed, they mean the person didn't have a gun. But there are many other ways that people can present a threat to officers. And I don't know the facts of any of these cases, so I'm not saying whether they were good, bad, or indifferent, but I would just ask you to read past the headlines and don't jump to the assumption that if the person was unarmed, it must have been racially motivated. We need more information before we draw a conclusion.
Go ahead.
Can I just, so I understand what you're saying. And back in another lifetime, I was a deputy probation officer. So I have some sympathies here. However, if somebody is unarmed, how does that escalate to the use of deadly force?
Well, I'll give you an example of a friend of mine who was killed in the line of duty by a guy that was naked. And they got into the guy that was naked was high. He was in a psychotic state. He wrestled with the officer, got the officer's gun away from him, and executed him on the street. So again, you've got to know all the facts before you can jump to, a firearm is not the only way somebody can kill a police officer.
Let me play criminal defense attorney on behalf of the cop for a moment. The guy was high on meth. He had already thrown a rock at the cops and maybe had hit one. And after he turned back on them with a rock in his hand, they shot him. So he's about 10 or 12 feet away. All cops know that there's a 21-foot rule. If somebody's within 21 feet of you, they can get to you before you can react. It's just the law. It's what every cop is trained on. So when they shot him and killed him, right next to his now dead body was a 3-pound rock. So I don't know, what do you do when someone turns on you with a 3-pound rock in their hand? I think it's horrible that guy is dead. I really do. But if you're going to sit back and say to cops, go out and protect us from each other, and of course you can protect yourself, what do you do with the guy who's about to toss a 3-pound rock at you?
Well, and we have an individual with mental health illnesses.
Which they didn't know about.
I believe that they did know about it. He had a history in this community from what I've learned on social media. So I think he was known in the community to have these mental health illnesses and had this episode.
So with a mental, and I have 2 clients right now killed by cops because of their mental health concerns. So I know what you're saying. But, so if in fact you know their mental health, does that mean it's okay? You have to now defer to the mental health and let them throw the 3-pound rock at you. Now add to that the cops that we want cops to be very well trained and to be almost robotic with how they react. Do not react to the emotions of the moment. Do not react with testosterone or your limbic part of your brain or adrenaline when you have somebody tossing something at you. That's asking, I think, too much from non-robotic human beings, that we want them trained. But I don't know, man, when somebody's about to toss a 3-pound missile at you and you don't know what's next, are we really going to tell cops not to protect themselves?
Well,
let me go back just a second here. Let me go back to Surar.
Yeah, just
let me go back to Surar. Go ahead, Sue.
Let's get back to this decision. This decision did not say that the prosecutor thought what the cops did was good or right. He said it doesn't meet the threshold in Washington state. Washington state law for self-defense for police officers is an extremely high standard. The prosecutor has to prove that the officers had malicious intent. That's an extremely high standard. Now, you can argue that that standard is too high and that maybe we should lower that standard. But then I would ask you, how many of you will send your sons and daughters out to be police officers if they're going to get prosecuted when they make a mistake. So I'm just asking you, big picture here. I don't think prosecution of a police officer is the only way to correct the problem.
Got a question here or a comment?
Well, I work in the legal system, and one of the comments that I've heard over and over again is that police shouldn't be policing police. That they should be independent investigations into these matters, and that's not being done.
Grand juries should, there's no question that grand juries should be investigating every police shooting, and prosecutors who work with them every day should make that decision. And I think prosecutors should excuse themselves from prosecuting or looking into prosecution any cop in their jurisdiction. Bring the guy in from the next county or use a grand jury. If nothing else, we need to rebuild the trust in the criminal justice system. It does not come from a prosecutor saying no charges against the cop.
Okay, let me go here to Sue Rar here, who
I had a
partly because just a second. Patience.
I'm the only
as
cop.
part of
Give me a break.
as part of the the task force that you're on, the president's task force. The issue of body cameras was also something that I believe the issue of body cameras was also discussed.
Absolutely.
But also
independent investigations.
But also the approach of which you're taking and trying to deal with now, with this idea of versus a warrior mentality to a guardian mentality.
Right.
And is that what it's going to take to build trust in the police? Because right now in communities of color, that seems to be the huge issue.
Well, and I think there absolutely is a necessity for police departments, for police officers to build trust with communities. And that is a complex issue. And if you'll bear with me for a minute, let me lay out the context for you, because there's a belief that all cops are the same, that all police departments are the same, that we have some national standards. We have 18,000 independent police departments in this country. It's part of our national culture. Law enforcement is a local endeavor, and the police department in every community is overseen by an elected official, either a sheriff or the mayor or whoever the executive is that hires the police chief. And so you have to understand that every police department is going to reflect the values of the voters in that community. Now, I used to think, yes, it represents the community, but there is no monolithic single community, and so there's always going to be people living in that community that feel marginalized, that are not part of that voting bloc that elects the mayor or elects the sheriff, and so there's a breakdown right there. The culture of a guardian, what we're trying to instill in our deputies and our police officers is you have to be safe as a police officer, but you also have to consider the civil rights of the person involved. So crime fighting is important, but defending civil rights is equally important, and it's trying to find the right balance.
I want to go to Chris because he was about ready to come out of his chair there for a minute. Go ahead.
Just a couple things. So one of which is with this recent decision is that if this had happened in isolation, then I don't think as many people, as bad as it is, I don't think as many people would get as worked up. But given, the constant drumbeat of people of color, mainly black men, getting killed by police, I mean, it's very difficult to sit here and listen to that and listen to some sort of objective defense for, a cop killing an unarmed person. Now, I think that, I don't know what police procedure is here or where the gentleman was killed, but, there should be an escalation, right? So you have a 3-pound rock, 21 feet, but isn't there an escalation? Don't folks have like tasers? Don't folks have nightsticks? I mean, right?
And if the real world were that neat and tidy, we absolutely would escalate, but there are so many variables that impact what happens. People are moving, you don't know what's behind this person. I don't know all the facts in that case, so I can't sit up here and defend those officers. I'm just asking you to consider the particular information in that case. Don't paint these police officers with the same brush as every cop in this country. I don't think that's, if that's what you're saying, that we should somehow judge this differently because of all the other incidents.
But what I'm saying is there's a proliferation of violence against people of color. So how does one explain that as a law enforcement person? I mean, how do we explain why so many people of color have been getting gunned down that are unarmed?
There's not support for those statistics. cops are not killing a larger percentage of blacks or people of color. What's happening, and I think it's a silver lining, that if we stay to task, it may help, is we are seeing it a lot more and we are talking about it a lot more. If you look at the numbers across the country, we're not killing more young black men. But what's happening is cell phones, thank God, body cameras, thank God, and security cameras that are catching all of these shootings, both by people against each other and cops against blacks. And we're talking about it more. But you will not find a survey that says, as of 5 years ago, cops just started killing a lot more people of color. It's not true. We're just talking about it. And the silver lining is, if we're talking about it, we're going to have a better chance for a solution than we were 10 years ago when we weren't talking about it.
Mark, those were a lot of black men that encountered fatalities by law enforcement officers. We just saw
I presented a couple of them. No question about it. All I'm saying is that the statistics don't support an increase in the killing.
No, I'm talking about relative to white men that are getting killed.
No
That's what I'm talking about.
Blacks
Thank you. That's where I was going with that.
But
I'm not talking about an absolute number.
Yeah, absolutely. But we always have killed more black men. 20 years ago, we killed more. 50 years ago, we killed more.
The only reason we're seeing it now because we have the proliferation of cell phones. I mean, I understand that. We all get that, right? But I was talking about black men relative to white men. That's what I was talking about.
Okay, I've got a question out here.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, I got the microphone. Remember, I hold the microphone.
Okay, you hold it up.
Hey, these people. Go ahead.
I have a couple of things to say.
Ma'am?
I have a couple of...
Excuse me. Over here.
You can't talk while we're talking.
There we go.
So I have a couple of things to say. I saw the video of the killing in Pasco, and obviously I didn't see the one that you saw. I saw a man turn around with his hands like this, and he was gunned down. And I didn't see a rock. He could have had one. And what I saw was wrong. You know, you just don't murder somebody like that. There was a man with his family, his children in a stroller, and he's screaming, he's unarmed, don't shoot the man. And they killed him. So the second thing, where we're going tonight seems to be nowhere. Why are we here? People are being killed senselessly. We need to talk about racism, systemic racism. What is causing the behavior, the attitudes, the actions, the beliefs for these things to continuously happen over and over again? And this has been going on for centuries. Where is the leadership in this country where people have the integrity to stand up and say this is wrong? It matters not what color your skin is. You shouldn't die because of the color of your skin. I'm a former teacher, and I've always taught about the beauty of diversity. I teach people that all people are created equal. All people are created equal. And when I see these police officers gunning people down, or people gunning the police officers down, the people that did the shooting and the people who were shot were students in somebody's classroom. They were family members in somebody's family. Until you get down to the nitty-gritty of this and get into the deep parts of our culture and our society to change attitudes and behaviors in our criminal justice system, our economic system, our political system, our religious system, we aren't going to have a change. And I put this challenge out. Where are the people who will stand up for what's right and say that this is wrong? You talk about our police force. Our police force are no longer trained to be policemen. They're being trained in a militaristic method and fashion to kill. Is that what we've come to? You need to talk about these things. Racism is the cause of it, so let's talk about the root causes of racism.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Go ahead.
I appreciate your remarks, sir. I think you're absolutely correct. I want to talk about training. That's what I know about. That's what I think I can be helpful in this conversation. And I will tell you, I went through the police academy here in Washington State in 1979. I worked as a cop for 33 years, and then I came back to the academy to oversee the training. When I got back to the academy, I was surprised by how militaristic the training had become. So you are right, we have changed our mindset. Now, a lot has changed in this country in the last 3 decades that has contributed to that. And some of that is the political push of tough on crime, zero tolerance. This is very popular. If you start back in the Nixon administration, that was a very successful political agenda, and law and order absolutely gets people elected. And so when you have a bunch of people elected on a law and order platform, Those are the people that are bringing in the law enforcement leaders, and they're saying, law and order, law and order. You look at New York, CompStat, it's all about crime control. The problem is we didn't talk about the rest of the story. And Tracy Mears is a professor at Yale University, very well known, and she was in the task force with me, and she said it so well. She said, crime control is not self-justifying. It's like having a tumor and saying our goal is to get rid of the tumor, and so we're going to just do whatever it takes to rip that tumor out, and in the process, we're destroying the body. And I think that we have gone down that line a little bit in this country where we're so focused on crime control that we have forgotten about all the other systems. In the academy, in the last 3 years, we have changed our training philosophy. We've taken down all the military accoutrements. We've changed our protocols. The recruits don't snap to attention in the hallway when I run across them. We have huge murals of the Constitution on the wall. Every single recruit gets a copy of the Constitution while they're in the academy. And we talk about this. But we have a long way to go because that culture is deeply ingrained. And it depends on the part of the country you're in, how deeply ingrained that military culture is. But I will tell you, it is well supported in most communities, and that is the uphill battle. When I started talking about changing the philosophy at the academy, I can't tell you the hate mail I got. And you know, the pushback, not just from cops, but from community leaders and politicians. It's like, what are you doing? You're soft on crime.
I want to go to another one of our poll results here regarding police. And this is a poll result. Which of the following would you do the most to prevent white police officers from shooting an unarmed non-white person? 31% said requiring police to wear a body camera. 15% said better training of officers. 12% said having more people of color on the police force. 10% said more police presence in high crime areas. And interestingly, 23% said all of the above without prompting. Back to the issue of body cameras here. You are a proponent of it, but I don't think it's something that can be done across the country.
Well, first of all, it really should be, and we need to change the laws in places like Washington, wherever else, to deal with the publicity or the public records concerns about it. But we know, like in Daytona Beach, you had a pilot study started about 6 years ago, that it works. First of all, it exonerates cops about 95% of the time because, generally speaking, that's true. And the other 5% need not to be cops. But the other thing it does is it cuts back on police brutality charges and allegations, and it actually stops unnecessary police brutality itself. So it works. It just makes common sense that when we put anyone, police officers, trained as we can make them, into a highly stressful situation, that it's better that we have some evidence to try and see what really happened. Because we as criminal defense attorneys know witnesses are horrible during eyewitness events, and particularly when there's stress involved. And I looked at 100,000 police reports, and I know that cops shade it to, he did this, he did that, he acted this way, he said this, he said that. There's no question about it. And then my clients say it was all the cops' fault. This is a, for the most part, objective piece of evidence that it is absurd that we're not embracing not only 35%, but 100%, because it will help the system be more reactive to the population they're supposed to be protecting, and it will protect officers, and it will protect my clients when they get unjustly accused.
Yet the ACLU brings up the issue of privacy.
It's great, and we can deal with it. You're right. If I'm going to take my body camera into your house, then there has to be an extra level of privacy protection, because after all, that's your greatest sphere of privacy. But I got it. But you put rules in place for that. Yes, we tell the people you can't file a public records request like they did here to say, I want every body camera that you have for the last 10 years without paying for it. Yes, you have to have some sensibility to it, but the idea of saying we're not going to do it because there are some privacy concerns we have to address, I think is letting the cart before the horse. Deal with it.
Go ahead.
I think all these are wonderful suggestions that have to be implemented. However, what we're not talking about is the institutional racism that exists in these institutions. And it's not just with law enforcement. It happens at universities, at colleges, at hospitals. It's there, it's a culture, it's a tradition. They're habits that are ingrained, and they're structured around oppressive principles. And what results is that there is a privilege that is granted to certain people, whether they want to admit it or not. They have that white privilege.
Go ahead. Okay, so thank you. So let's get to the root cause, just following on here, about racism. The gentleman made some really eloquent points, and I'd like to elaborate on one or two of them. So racism, yeah, of course it's always been here. It's been here since slavery, right? And people thought racism, I don't even want to get to the whole sort of electing Obama now in a post-racial period. That's a whole bunch of, oh man, if I wasn't wired, I'd say some stuff. But yeah, it's not true.
We can do the math. We only have an hour.
Okay, but racism persists. It's no longer of the sort of old-fashioned, I don't want my daughter to marry a black man racism anymore, or black people aren't as smart as white people racism. It's a more subtle racism that we face right now. This belief that black people and people of color, generally speaking, are violating traditional American values like hard work, right? It's that kind of racism. That's explicit racism, but there's also implicit racism over here. My colleague, Anthony Greenwald at the University of Washington, has created this device, or this study called the implicit association test, which picks up this implicit racial, gender, or age biases, right? And so one of the things I'd like to ask Sue here is whether or not you're testing your recruits on not only explicit racism, but also this implicit racism that many times people don't know they're aware of.
Well, I would do that, except we would not be able to find a human being that doesn't have a ton of implicit bias. That's the way the human brain is wired. What we have to do is help them understand how to recognize it and manage it. Every person has implicit bias. I have bias.
Everybody does.
I've had to come to grips with my own biases, and I've talked to my recruits about that in a very embarrassing way. But we can't find people that don't have bias. They don't exist.
I'm not suggesting screening them out of the process. I'm saying test them and then make them cognizant and aware of it. And then maybe they can counter it.
We are building a complete class, and we're working with a neuroscientist that is helping us to create training so that, I don't want to get too deep into this, but the way your brain works is, it's not like a video camera. You don't take a picture and everything just comes into your brain. Your eyes see, but your brain only grabs those things that support what you already believe.
Very true.
And we have to explain to our recruits that your perception is not like a video camera. Once you recognize how your brain's working, you have to compensate for that. And we've got one of the leading neuroscientists in the country working with us to build this class, not only to teach officers to be more aware during stress times, but it goes right into recognizing and managing your bias. So we don't make any bones about it. Yes, we are biased. Everybody's biased. All of our institutions are biased. We have to, instead of fighting about it, we have to talk about what to do to fix, to compensate for it.
Got another question or comment out here, and I want to note that I have a bias against the University of Washington Huskies, having graduated from WSU.
Me too.
Anyway, go ahead.
Thank you for letting me speak. Mine deals with democracy. Here in Yakima City and Yakima County, my vote was stolen over the last year during the I-502 approvals. Yakima, the city of Yakima, and both the county decided to not approve the Washington state law. I was very involved with politics in that nature. And we even had feedback from Ken Irwin, the sheriff, who came into the city meeting on record and, brought bias, this bias that you're talking about of they didn't want marijuana in our neighborhood. Mexicans are often dumb and stupid. And he actually used some very words that would, if people would just look on the record, they would see these things. All of the items that you keep talking about, training, things of that nature, well, the police force in Yakima now is enforcing a different type of law than the state mandate for this marijuana policy, which is one of those representative areas where you have that underlying refusals to say these Hispanics are drug dealers. Our recent politicians have stated that and are running on that one item when we know in this valley that it's not, but the state created a policy to try to create policies to prevent that, but our county and our city are basically against trying to let those succeed.
Anybody want to comment on that? I take it not. Let me move over here. Actually, I want to move over here to the young lady. Go ahead.
You will get unelected if you are, quote, light on crime. And that literally happens. Since when you talk about with Nixon and forward, those were the days of the crack cocaine, where if you were guilty of crack cocaine as opposed to powder cocaine, at that point we know we had the studies that blacks were involved in more crack cocaine. It was 10 to 100 times the sentence. And finally, we dealt with it 15 to 20 years later, but we also started the 10-20 life laws in most states. You can't undo that, but let me tell you something. That has a devastating impact on the minority population, and we're still dealing with it 15, 20 years later, and it's not going to change unless we do what you were talking about. Can't make believe we're just going to talk about talking. It's got to be some acknowledgement of the true systemic changes, and it's not, if we work well, if we're successful tonight, and move forward quickly from tonight, it's going to take a generation, still.
Hi, my name is Jamie. I'm a student, so I'm learning about this, but I just had a question or two. With the stance on the police being, portrayed as, and I can't say if they're doing it out of being racial or not, doing these shootings, with their training, are they getting after all this is happening, getting some extensive training on how to deal with racial culture, or deal with different cultures, I apologize. Also on not judging by the choices of few and labeling the whole, and also not by judging just on what they see, because a lot of people do judge, of the way you're dressed or what you drive, and then that gives them an automatic okay, maybe something's wrong, red flag, or something like that. So I mean, is there extensive training going on in that, along with their police training of reacting and crime control?
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm here, is I knew that I might be taking a little heat, but it's an opportunity for me to explain I really do want to explain to people what the extent of our police training is, because I think many people would be surprised that it is as extensive as it is in some areas, and yet I wish I had the recruits for a year, not just 5 months, because police officers deal with the failures of every other social institution. And so if you have a person with mental illness that is disrupting the community, it's not the police department's fault, but we end up having to deal with it. And our police officers are not trained psychologists, but they have to deal with that person when there's a very threatening situation. Kids that can't get through school, that are struggling in their families, all these other social institutions don't get the blame when we have somebody who our society has not been able to bring up to be a functioning member of society.
And Sue, I just want to go on the record to say that I believe that there are a lot of good officers out there, a lot of officers that I'm happy that they are out there in our community. And there are a few that have to be held accountable. And some of them are not being held accountable. So how do we do that?
Okay, I agree with you.
Okay, question here. Go ahead.
And so my answer to you is we have to hold the officers accountable in a fair way. They need to be judged on the individual situation in which they were involved. And I know that's hard to do because there's so much emotion and there's so much anger because of all of the other situations. But our justice system treats people, they get to have due process, and police officers need to be able to have due process as well. We ask them to go risk their lives. We owe them due process. And I want to reiterate, the fact that a police officer isn't criminally charged doesn't mean we like what they did or we endorse what they did. I just want to be really clear about that.
And all these victims deserve the same thing.
Thank you.
I agree.
Go ahead.
Or not.
Yeah, I'm trying to work you in. Yeah, here we go.
I'd just like to follow up on some of the comments about institutional racism, which permeates all of the institutions of our society: criminal justice, economic system, our political system, and one of the most fundamental, our school system. And so I do have some comments, but I'm hoping that sometime during the evening, one of you or perhaps the audience will define systemic racism. So my question or my comment is, Prejudice is learned, and we're not genetically born with prejudice. And that gives me hope that it can be unlearned, and I feel that there's a critical role for our schools working with our children. And here in Yakima, I'm excited to say that we're not just talking, we're beginning to take action. You may have heard of a pilot program now in 8 Yakima schools. It's called UnityWorks, and we're working with teachers, students, parents, and administrators on issues of individual prejudice and systemic racism. So I hope you'll take a look. It's unityworks.org, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'll take a shot. Let me take a shot at defining institutional racism. I have never walked into a job interview. I've never walked in front of a judge. I've never been pulled over for a speeding ticket and said, I really wish I was black. And that's what we're dealing with. I mean, you can say we're going to be better than that and it's not really there, but the reality is, you talk about white privilege or whatever you want to call it, you never walk into a situation as a white and go, boy, I would fare better if only I was black in this circumstance. I don't know how you fix it, but if you want to help define it, that's the reality, and I can't be talking for you, and you should be, but that's the reality that the black community seems to be trying to deal with, and that's what we call the institutional racism. It exists, it's there, it ain't easy to define, but it happens every day in every way.
Everybody has a definition here. Go ahead.
I don't have a definition, but I have examples. At the Yakima County Courthouse in the late 90s, I was sitting at a desk outside the clerk's office working with a client on a family law case. And the bailiff comes up to me, rookie, brand new, and he tells me, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm here with my client. And he's like, you can't be here. And I'm like, why? And he's like, that's my desk. And I'm like, yeah, right. And so I keep writing. And he tells me, you need to leave. And I'm like, what? He's like, you need to leave. And also gently, he moves his hand and he reveals his gun. I can tell you, Mr. O'Mara, with all due respect, that would not happen to you.
No,
it would not happen to you.
Exactly what I'm
so
saying.
that,
There's no
so,
way that would happen to
so
you.
that's just an example of what institutional racism is.
Go ahead.
So let me move beyond these exemplars and sort of look at it from a different perspective. I agree with everything my colleagues up here are saying, but so think about it like this. I don't care who we are, once we become a boss or we become a president, CEO, principal, whatever, we are all a product of how we grew up. And we take those biases with us everywhere we go. So those biases are going to remain with you. So if you're in a position to hire people, if you're in a position to met out discipline, we have seen, I think recently in the state of Washington, that kids of color receive more discipline than non-kids of color, right? These are all products of institutional racism and biases. The issue is once again, the young lady said education is power, but the issue is that most of these people that are in these really powerful positions, that are in positions to met out justice or hire and fire people, those are older folk. They're not going to change. The only hope we have is from the kids that are in the system right now, in the educational system that are growing up. You know, they're in a more diverse environment, so all we can do is hope, and there's empirical evidence to support this claim that kids tend to be less racist than their parents are, simply because they're in a more diverse environment, and beyond that, the more educated the kids become, they become less and less biased and prejudiced. It's called the cohort replacement effect in social science terms.
Question here.
I had a question. I'm a Native American. I'm wondering, why aren't our treaties taught in history class? Is that systematic racism?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, is that illegal?
We
all don't live in teepees. We all don't have headdresses. We, just like you, we all the same. So, I mean, how do you go about, how could I go about getting our treaties in the history books?
Your treaties?
Yeah,
treaties.
No, I know.
No, I know. Well, at the university level, Native American, that's taught. Now, if you're talking about at the secondary level or elementary school level, that's something for to be discussed at the school board level, if I'm not mistaken. Just to give you one example, in Texas, they are literally whitewashing history, right? Literally whitewashing history. Slavery was not about race, it was about economics, right? So, and that's happening at the state level. So, I mean, it has to be some intervention on that level. I think there has to be a large, really vociferous and powerful lobbying effort on behalf of the Native American community.
Yes, exactly.
Right? But I don't really know how to. I'm not really well versed in the practical part of that. I'm going to have to defer to my colleagues here.
We're running short of time here, but before we go, I'd like to get a closing comment from each one of you about, how we keep this conversation going about race, because as we mentioned in the beginning, it's not an easy thing to talk about, but yet we need to talk about. Mark O'Mara?
Well, part of the concern is when 85% of the people think it's somebody other community's problem, you're not going to get buy-in. That woman who was saying, I want to be involved is great, but when more than half the people think it's just not a concern for them, you're not going to get buy-in. And the silver lining that's so frightening to say, that we're talking about this a lot more, that it's in our face literally once a week. Either cops are shooting somebody or somebody's shooting a cop. I gotta hope, although it's a dangerous time for the next few years, I'm going to believe that talking about it so much more, having it in our face so much more is going to come up with solutions that we may not have even thought of yet. Better police training, better community involvement, maybe some better training in how to interact with cops. I don't believe that there's a cop in America who wakes up and goes, I really hope I get to screw with a black kid today. Nor is there a black kid who walks up and goes, I can't wait to mouth off to a cop today. But what happens is that little interaction where maybe they have a touch more attitude than they need to have, both sides, and it goes very slowly. The cop says, what are you doing here? And the kid goes, I'm not telling you. And the cop goes, yes, you are. And I don't have to. And it just sort of ratchets up a little bit to where the cop, who cannot lose a battle on the street, by the way. We have told cops, do not lose the battle on the street. You're there to protect us. Cannot. We call it contempt of cop. We call it whatever we want to. But maybe if we can figure out how to short circuit those mini decisions that are made on both sides, and we'll get to the point where we have 13% of the black population in America and 38% of them in the criminal justice system. Got to figure it out.
Laura.
Well, the conversations need to continue, and they need to continue in a safe space. And I don't feel like TV and cameras is a safe space. This room with everybody that's here, a conversation weeks from now, months from now, without the cameras, all of you local folks back here will welcome input from the West Side and nationally, but we need to solve it here ourselves in our community.
Chris, very well spoken.
To pick up on the safe space reference, so when I teach classes, I generally have a class, that's really diverse. And some of the conversations that we have in those classes, they're very strained at the very beginning, but by the time we hit the middle of the quarter and beyond that, it gets really heated. But oftentimes, the students come out with a better understanding of each other's respective positions. And that's because in my class, I try to create a safe space. So that's the little part that I play. Beyond that, look, for me, I watch Seinfeld every now and then. I try to learn how white folks roll. That's where I get my info. I just ask some of you white folks to watch Sanford & Son every now and then.
Oh, man. And Surar.
I wish I had something profound to say. I don't. I don't have a book to push. I haven't written a book. But I would encourage people, though, you can download the President's Task Force report for free online. It's over 100 pages long. And that represents the input of over 100 leading experts in this country giving input, people testifying. And I just want to reinforce that policing is local. That's really important. We all watch TV about national stuff, but we live our lives locally, and so anything you can do in your local community to build that relationship with your police department. I understand your frustration, the opportunity lost to have a conversation, and both sides need to reach out. And when both sides reach out, it's a lot easier to have that conversation.
Can I just say one more thing?
You
Come on, Enrique.
Go ahead.
All right.
Quickly.
So look, That was my little comedy bit a second ago. So, look, so I think for real, I think we need to go into places in which we're not accustomed to going. So if you're into, you know, sort of public spaces, shared public spaces are really good places to meet new people. A Starbucks, perhaps, that's not in your neighborhood. A grocery store that's not in your neighborhood. Go to a movie theater in another neighborhood. White folks as well as black folks as well as Latinos. That's how we get to know each other. That's how we get these conversations going. And let me just, as a social scientist, the more interracial contact we have, the less prejudice and bias we tend to be.
All right, very good. Very well said.
Okay, that was
I just want to say thank you to our panel members. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you to this audience and all of the people here in the Yakima Valley, and some of you I know that came from other side of the mountains. What some people might not be able to see is that we got a little ring up here of folks that have attended here tonight, and it's kind of warm. I think I lost about 5 pounds, hopefully, but you know, thank you. Thank you for being here, and you know, this is how we need to make these things happen. Really, the goal of this program was to get people talking about the issues related to race, justice, and democracy. And our hope now is that those of you that are in our audience tonight and those of you watching will continue this important conversation with your families, your friends, in your schools, with your community leaders, and with law enforcement. The conversation really needs to continue. Now you can view the complete results of the KCTS 9 Elway poll at kcts9.org. We want to thank the Yakima Valley Museum for hosting us tonight, and thanks to the audience, to our panel, and to all of you that were here watching this evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Race, Justice, and Democracy is presented in partnership with Heritage University and Humanities Washington. Funding for the program is provided by viewers like you. Thank you.